Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Coleman. I'm with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. Thanks for joining our meeting today. This is on our cohort meeting around broadband access, which is around broadband infrastructure and service development in your community. We've got a great agenda today, although it's a little, we had a little change. Our colleague from Detroit had some family issues and had to postpone till another session, which I was disappointed on. But and instead you're going to get a presentation on wireless technologies from me. So I'll let you know in advance, I'm no wireless engineer. So maybe Ken can even stay on and help us with some of this wireless stuff, or look forward to your own expertise helping us out on that. And we hope to have the Detroit Community Network people back at another day. So we'll see how that, see if we can make that happen. I really want to thank you for joining Access. You know, in some ways that's the hardest because there's dollars involved. Broadband networks can be expensive, and trying to figure out the business model can be a challenge. At the same time, this is a problem that you can really solve. If your broadband networks are deficient, all it does take is money to make it happen. And you can do that, as opposed to some of the other things around digital literacy or digital equity. There's a lot of other issues involved there that might continue on. Need for ongoing efforts to work in those fields, the youth side as well. And so we're going to start the day, because last time when we asked people what they wanted out of these cohort meetings, people said to talk to each other more. And so we're going to do that. And our host Nancy is going to set up some meeting rooms, and you get to pick which one you want to be in. We have our urban, suburban, and rural choices. And I'm going to ask, let's see, I'm going to ask Robbie to take a lead in the urban, and I'm going to go for the rural. And Adrienne, if you want to take the suburban room just to help facilitate that conversation, that would be great. We're going to have about 25 minutes in there to talk about what's your situation, what's your path forward that you've been talking about, what has been your progress to date, and what are some of the barriers. So if people just want to have an informal conversation, that will be great. So we're going to spend a little time there, and so enjoy that and figure out, you know, how are you like these other communities in the program? How is your community different? And just have a great conversation. So I'll see you in the meeting rooms. So I see a button that says join a breakout room. Click on that. Oop.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I am an intern with Stephanie. I don't know if Stephanie's on here or not.
Yeah, Stephanie's here. So Nancy, I'm not seeing that join the meeting room.
I think if you scroll to the bottom of the join window, it's at the bottom. And so it'll, as people start joining, you start to see their names go down into those bottom rooms. But you have to scroll to the bottom to see all the choices.
Okay, thanks.
And are we supposed to be seeing something right now?
Yeah, Nancy, could you do a little tutorial on that?
I don't see
if
it.
you don't see a window in front of you to join the breakout room, try scrolling to the bottom of the platform and hit the breakout button, and you might see then that you can join a breakout room.
Great. Okay, so if you hit the more button, then you can join it.
If you're a co-host, you would hit more and you can join. if you're a regular participant, I believe there's an actual breakout button. But if you don't see one, yeah, go to more, and then there should be a breakout option.
And then
This is Sharon
eventually
Irish.
we'll-
That's not working.
I
There
was
is
going
no,
to say another option might be if you click, I don't know how it looks on people's Zoom clients, but click breakout rooms. If you can
there's
see
no
that.
such thing.
No such thing. Okay.
So
But
if you do
some
click
people are
on more,
joining.
then there should be a breakout room button.
Yeah, I see some people have joined, so
I do too, but so once I get to the breakout rooms in progress, I'm not sure then how I select that room.
scroll down to the bottom and you should see a few join options.
I also don't have any of those buttons on mine.
Neither do I.
Okay, so you know what we have here? We've got a breakout room. So we'll just have our own discussion right here, kind of maybe a mixed group. So Linda, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Linda Young with the South Shore Community. The Neighborhood Network Alliance is our Illinois Connected Communities name, and we're out of Chicago, Illinois, the South Side.
Okay.
So I can also assign folks.
Oh, why don't you do that? So Linda is urban
Okay,
and Diamond can be urban. Sharon is urban.
I
Tim,
would
where
like,
do you want to be?
I don't know if that's an option.
Tim? Or Harry? Kenzie? Let us know what room you want to
Yeah,
be
I had trouble logging on. Is rural an option? Because I'm just based out of here in Aledo.
in. Yeah, Kenzie, that you want to be rural?
Yes, thank you.
Nick should be rural. Tim? Or Harry? Why don't you put both of them in rural, I think.
Yes, rural would be great.
Jay, do you want to be in the rural group or in the urban group?
and so anyone else that comes in, I can ask them, and do you want me to
Okay.
put you in rural?
Yes.
Okay,
Thanks, Nancy.
you're welcome. Jay, when you get a chance, let me know which breakout room you'd like to go to. If you see that you can join rural, suburban, or urban, then do so. Otherwise, I can assign you to rural, suburban, or urban. Hi, Marty. We've assigned folks to breakout rooms. And so you can decide which one you'd like to join, rural, suburban, or urban. And if you can't find a way to join those with your Zoom buttons, then let me know and I can I can put you in one of those rooms. And I'll go ahead and send you the question too, in case you can't hear me.
I can actually talk, so.
So you should see a button where you can join now.
Yes, I got it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
Hi, Bill.
It's exciting to have everyone here. Hope you had a good discussion in your group. We had a great one in the rural group, so I appreciate everyone's participation there. Ken Demlow is with us today, and Ken is with HR Green. They're an engineering consulting firm with offices around the country. We've seen Ken speak at conferences across the country over the years, and he's done a webinar for us here in Minnesota previously. And we're going to hear about feasibility studies. And as an introduction to that, the feasibility study is really a process that a community can go through to, I like to think of it as a decision-making funnel where communities can think about what are our options and start to pick the right way to go. So at the end of the feasibility study, they don't have a report that says, here's all your choices. A good feasibility study helps you figure out, let's make some choices as we go based on good data of what's possible. I think Ken is going to describe that process for us today. And so we hope to, when working with your communities, that as you think about your choices, you start to think about what data do we need to make intelligent choices about that. So Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you're going to share your screen and show your slides. So welcome so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm going to go into the slide presentation. This should make sure this transitions correctly. Yeah. So you're going to see my next slides coming up because I'm on a split screen. That's okay. So you can know what's coming too. So there on the right side, you'll see what's coming next. So you'll be able to keep track of how things are coming. But I want to, as Bill said, in talking about feasibility, there's a typical feasibility model that I just want to go through, and that's kind of the base of our discussion. Everything else is bonus material, and I just as we talk about this, I think the bonus material might end up being even more valuable than this base thing. So let's talk about the base first. A typical feasibility model is and Bill characterized that correctly. But I just want to make sure you all are thinking about this because that can mean different things to different people. And so for a lot of folks, the typical start of a feasibility is to say, can we build our own network? Can our community build a network? And that's typically a starting point in a lot of feasibility discussions. So that being the starting point, the next step is to collect data. And that's typically done through a survey, and there's typically surveys of businesses, surveys of residents. And there's also typically a discussion with anchor institutions, and that could be public sector, that could be emergency management, that could be key businesses or key economic development or department heads, all those sorts of folks. So you have those surveys, and then you have the meetings to collect data to figure out what's going on, to get a lay of the land. And then from there, a lot of folks develop, a lot of consultants develop kind of some generalized costs, like here's a rural cost per mile or whatever, and you have this many miles, and so you start putting together, okay, we have can we do a municipal network, or can we do our own network? We have this data that shows us what the needs are, how many people feel like they are dissatisfied or need. And then you get generalized cost based on here's some, per mile or per foot, but typically per mile in a generalized way. And then you say, okay, if there's that much, if there's this much need, this many people said they're dissatisfied, and we know what a general cost number is, like per mile or whatever, then you say, okay, if that many people are dissatisfied, that's how we can predict how many people would take this service if we did a service, if we provided internet service or provided phone or provided video, providing those triple play. Here's how much revenue could we expect. Here's what the general cost is, and then you say, okay, is that feasible or not? Will that kind of revenue, will that cover the costs, and how long will that take? And then if that shows is feasible, then a community typically goes to funding, to funding sources, whether that's banks or bonds or whatever, they go to funding sources. And then if it doesn't look like those ideas are feasible, and this is, again, Bill set it up well, because the typical process that I just want to kind of give you a feel of is that if that municipal build isn't workable, or if it doesn't look like it would work or isn't feasible, or the bonding doesn't really work, or those sorts of things, then it's okay, let's go to partners to see what partners might be able to do, so other providers or whatever, see what they may be able to do. That's actually the most typical model. Okay, so there's your bulk of the discussion. Now let's get on to the bonus material. And again, I think you might find the bonus material even more interesting and more helpful than the basic information.
Ken,
Yes.
Could you, our host is asking you to go to more of the presenter mode. So you can, because the slides are pretty small on the in this mode.
So bear with me.
So if you go to display and presenter views, you can see the full slide.
So display settings.
Yeah, switch to presenter view.
Is that better?
No. Why don't you switch to the next slide and see what happens? No, now we're only seeing a bit of your slide. Huh.
Okay, so I'm going to, real quick, I'm actually going to, I'm going to switch to where this may help. So hold on, bear with me just a second.
Okay.
Because I've got a way to do this.
Nancy always says we should test, and I always, we don't need to test anymore, but sometimes that might be a good idea.
Okay, I'm having.
So Ken, I'm gonna share my screen, I think that will be better.
Okay.
1 second.
Can you still hear me okay?
Yep, great.
Okay, okay. Yes, Linda, while we're looking, fiber to the home, FTTH is fiber to the home. And there's other options like fiber to all premises. There's fiber that doesn't go out to all the businesses, but yeah, fiber to the home is typically the beginning point of those discussions. So in the typical, so that's the kind of the typical feasibility model. And the problem that comes up with that, and again, Bill, as he started, he kind of talked about some other ways of looking at this, because in this most typical model where it's just verifying, can we do fiber to the home or not, some challenges can come up with that. And one of the challenges is that you get all the way through this process and it only proves or disproves one option. And that can be a problem, because what if you need to go to other options and are there ways of proving or disproving those other options? And then another problem that can come up with that is that if you're looking at funding and you're going down one path to try to get the funding to work, well, the problem there is that what happens if the path changes, or what happens if funding doesn't work for that? Then you're kind of stuck with, okay, we have all this stuff, but now we haven't been able to prove out a model that has worked all the way through and that has moved on towards funding. So I bring that up to say that can be real problems. There's a company that we're not working, or a community that we're not working with, but that some friends are, and they got all the way through this process, just as it's shown in that chart from left to right, and then they got the funding, and the funding is a problem because they don't have enough bonding capacity. Well, now they're stuck with, we've done all this work, that's not really possible, so now what do we do? And so Bill, if you can go to the next slide. So what we want to, and this kind of aligns with some of the comments that Bill made at the beginning, what we want to talk about is a different model. So what could it be? Let's reimagine what feasibility could be, or let's flesh out what feasibility could actually do. So we work at a little different model, and that is that we go from visioning, where we say, okay, what does the community really want? What does the community really need to do? Then let's plan that. And that's before we get to any designing. And so in the visioning and the planning is when we're working out the options and working out what the possibilities could be. You don't get through all that and make sure you know what the options are. And we'll talk about the details of this, but make sure you know what the options are, making sure that you have goals and that the options fit those goals. Make sure that those goals are feasible, and then we get to any designing that we'll do, and then it moves on. So that just example below that where it says start with goals, those are examples of one of our clients and the example of their goals. And they said, for our community, what we want is we want it to be ubiquitous, we want it to be fast, we want it to be reliable and competitively priced. Those are our goals. Now you can have other goals. Other goals could be that we want to own something and control it, or that we don't want to own anything and we don't, so you could have different goals. And this is just an example of theirs, but they wanted to have those goals before they started talking about what is actually financially feasible. What is it we want to do? And then let's get to what models could meet that. And then let's work on whether those are feasible or not. So Bill, if you can go to the next slide. So that model looks more like this. And this is a very different model, because if we started with how it's typically done, which is just that kind of linear progression, this is a different way of looking at it. And it's a whole new model. And we're finding a lot of success with this for our clients, because this gives them a lot more to be able to say, okay, here's our goals. Now, what are our options? And let's in the feasibility process, let's use the feasibility process to prove or disprove or prove whether something works or not, to prove our options, to see what options we end up with. So Bill, if you can go to the next slide. Let's go through these just really quickly about what these different pieces look like. And again, the major difference between this and traditional feasibility is that you explore the options of what options do we have to meet our goals, and let's work through those to see which are feasible and which are not, and let's bring funding into it so that all those pieces of what becomes feasible or what could be feasible, all of those are actually dealt with, worked through, are proven or disproven during the process. So now, Bill, if you can go to the next slide. We'll just kind of quickly go through the pieces of this and how that works. The first is the data collection. And again, this is all moving towards what are the options that will meet our goals, and what of those options are feasible and what aren't. And so one is data collection, and this is data collection typically is roughly the same as in the traditional feasibility model. We still use the same tools, surveys, stakeholder meetings. But if we're looking at what are our goals and then what are the options to meet those goals, then the data collection can actually focus in on getting the data you need to be able to work through the feasibility of what can meet your goals. So let me give you an example of how that's different. So say, for example, if one of the biggest concerns is ubiquity, and that just means, for those of you who don't kick these terms around a lot, ubiquity just means everybody has the same coverage, or everybody has access and can have access to the same coverage. Well, if that's a concern in the community, then your data collection needs to work on meeting that goal. So for example, in our breakout group, I love the discussion of that there were certain folks that people were going to go talk with to get data from them, because if you're looking at it from a model of what are our goals and what are the options to meet those goals, then your data collection needs to make sure that you get that data. So if ubiquity is a goal, and there are areas that don't have good coverage, then you need to make sure in your data collection that you get the data on what's happening there, so that again you're using that as part of the proving of your feasibility. That's one example. There can be a lot of examples. Like another example could be if you want to use your feasibility as an economic development tool, that there's certain businesses or types of businesses you want to attract. then again, you need to make sure you're collecting the data that will meet that goal. And so as you're getting in the data, you want to just make sure that any of those key areas that you need the data to meet your goals, that you're getting that data. And that's coming through. So Bill, if you can go to the next slide. So data collection is fairly similar, but it might tailor to the particular topics. And then we go to the options. Okay, so again, you have goals, and then you're looking at options to meet those goals. And just to give you, there's some things on the screen here, some maps. One is that there was one community that was saying one of our goals we think, or one of our options could be to have, because we need to connect our municipal facilities. So one of our goals is to connect our facilities. So one of the things we might want to do, one option might be a ring. And we'll do that ring, and that'll take care of meeting our goals, but we also want better coverage for the citizens. So then we may talk to partners about maybe going out from there. So again, you see how the goals and how the goals come into options. So one of the things that they really wanted to look at was, okay, if we did a ring, but we have other broadband concerns, now that'll meet our internal concerns, but we have other concerns. Do we need a partner to do that? And then they looked at, well, and that's on the bottom right there, that inset. So if you have publicly owned, then and so if you had a publicly owned utility, then you have a lot of control, but you have a lot of risk. On the other side of it, if you go straight to have just private partners come in, well, you have a lot less risk, but you also, are they going to cover, like if a goal was ubiquity, will they cover every place, or will they just go to the places that make them the most money? And so in looking at the different options, and again, we're talking about feasibility here. So in looking at the options, this particular client of ours said, let's look at a ring just to do ours that we'll own, and then see public or private use outside of that. And then as they looked at that, I said, well, but that doesn't meet our other goals, because our other goals are ubiquity. Our other goals are making sure we have some control, because providers have their take was that providers had really kind of picked and chose, and they didn't have good reliability and all that. So they said, this is an option, but I wanted to look at other options too, like what if they went further, what if they did more, and the risks and the rewards of that. But again, in feasibility, those options, you need to look at what data do we need to know, what survey information, what is the information we need, the data we need, but then also what do the dollars those look like. So Bill, if you can go to the next one. So from there, what we do is we say, okay, so here's the options, and in those options, let's look at not just one option of fiber to the home and see if that's feasible. Let's look at the different options that can meet your goals. So that particular client, this is an example of theirs too, that particular client, they said, we have the option of the ring, but we're concerned about ubiquity and control. So let's look at some other options, like what if we went ahead and did an entire fiber to the home in our community? Let's have that as another option. Another thing they did was they did an RFI to providers and said, okay, here's the things we're looking at. Here's the ways that we might help financially. Here's some incentives we could put in. Some grants we may be able to go with you to try to go get. So there can be some incentives for the providers to come. So they did an RFI to providers and said, if we were going to do this, and here's some incentives we could do, who would be interested? And they actually had a good round of providers. There were 4 providers that came in and said, you know what, if you were going to do X, Y, and Z, we would be interested. Well, now if you're following me, what are those? Those are different options, right? So they have the option of a ring that they own. They have an option of fiber to the home that they would own, but then they also have these options with providers. And now they were up to like 4 different options. They made sure that in their survey work and in their meetings, that they got data that would give them information on these different options. And then Bill, if you can go to the next slide. Then on the cost side, we went through and said, okay, for each option, here's the different possibilities. And here's what the cost would be. And that's just an example of the fiber side of the cost. But here's what the cost would be. And then we went to, with the data that we collected, we knew what their potential revenue would be. And so we said, okay, and that's going back to typical feasibility paths. So we know what the interest is. That gives us some idea of revenue from the people who would be the customers. here's what the costs are because we did a high level cost of each of those 4 options. Here's what the cost would be. And then there's an example of one of the models of, and I wouldn't ask you to be able to interpret this graph, plus it's so small, but those are examples of the tools of being able to say, here's what our revenue is, here's what our cost would be, here's how that would work. Now, if you're following me, so they were able to do this because they were pulling these all together, and they did the RFI as for the potential providers all within the feasibility process. They were able to say, here's our goals, here's 4 options that could meet those goals. Now let's look at the feasibility, and we have the revenue potential from our surveys, and we also know the needs from our surveys, and then we have the cost of those options. So now we have an exploration of, we have a proving of the different options that could meet their goals. And Bill, if you go to the next slide. So the last piece of this that often gets forgotten until the end is funding. So what we recommend is that you go ahead and bring your funding people in, and whether that's grant possibilities, whether that's if that's going to be bonds, or if that's going to be banks, or if there's an incentive that the community can do, and that's going to take funding from the community, bring all that into to this process, and let the funding people, and again, if you're going to apply for grants, let that be part of the feasibility process. If we've identified these grants, here's the data that we need to provide for these grants. And then if there's banks, or if there's other funding mechanisms, bring them into the conversation, bring them into the 4 possibilities, bring them into the feasibility of the 4 possibilities, because what you end up with then are your options, and you've proven them all the way to the end. And some of them may not be feasible. Well, at that point, then that option goes out, and you have the other ones that are left. But we think in terms of feasibility then as a full proving ground that starts with your goals, that moves on towards what are the options to meet those goals, making sure you have the data for those, making sure that you then have the revenue and cost side, and have the funding people that come in, so that there's a full proving of those options, so that you know what options will stand, so you know what possibilities you actually have, and then through the feasibility process, you've actually narrowed down what you can actually do, what your options actually are. And you have actually, and last thing I want to mention on that is on the grant side. This is really important, because if you're gathering this data, and if you're looking for the possibility of grant money, you're going to have to challenge maps. You're going to have the data that can say, here's what's actually going on in our community. Because for the FCC maps, and for most state maps, and states are trying to improve maps, or some states are trying to improve maps, but still, all of the grants are, or not all, but a lot of the grants are based on the state level maps for the state grants, and the federal level maps, FCC maps for the federal level grants. And you need to collect the data, work on what the needs are, and actually be preparing that if you think that's going to be an important source of revenue to make any option work. You've got to be working on how can we prove what's actually going on in our area, so that we can make ourselves eligible for maps or for grants that the maps might not have us eligible for. Again, it's all part of the proving ground of feasibility. So Bill, if you can go to the last slide. So in looking at this, or sorry, 2 more slides. This just wraps up what I said. So it's the mechanism to get through that, and then and we've talked about that. That's the mechanism to get through it. And then the last slide just is kind of how we view what we do. So just as a final overarching thought, communities, you're going to need to lead the feasibility process, and we encourage you to lead them as here's what we need to know, and here's the people we need to bring in, whether it's partners, whether it's funding folks for grants, to bring all of those into the feasibility process, so that your feasibility process leads you to here's steps we can take to make this happen, and viewing the feasibility process as the proving grounds to get there. I just want to say, and this is my last comment, I just want to say, when that traditional, the very first slide, and I said everything else is bonus material, but that very first slide that said the typical is just a move from left to right, I just ask you to be careful with that, because what we don't want to see you end up with is, through the end of the process, ending up with okay, we had one idea and it's proved not feasible, or we had one idea and it's proved feasible, but the funding people don't agree. we want to make sure that you go from here's what our goals are and here's how we're going to achieve those goals, and feasibility is actually a proving ground. So Bill, that's closing thoughts, but that's the whole let's redefine what we think of as feasibility.
Great. That sounds great. Questions from anyone? Don't be shy.
This is Rosanna. What's a reasonable amount of time to allot for a feasibility study? It seems like it takes a really, really long time.
Great question. Rosanna, that really kind of depends on some circumstances. But I would say typically to go through whichever process you go through, if you're working with somebody that goes that left to right, you know, or if you kind of do this reimagined concept of feasibility, typically you'll see consultants say 4 to 6 months is a pretty typical. And part of that has a lot to do with the survey and making sure that there's enough time for the survey to be open to get the responses that you need, or if there's, you know, some, like if there's a certain demographic, like if you want to find out if seniors, how important broadband is, and that one of your goals is to make sure they can stay in their homes longer, you know, that kind of thing. If they're not responding, then you may have to pivot and say, okay, how can we get to them so that we can find out what they need, if that's one, those type of examples of goals. But if you allow 6 months, barring some really strange circumstance, that should be plenty. Typically, it's in the 4 to 6 month range to get all those pieces done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
What are the 4 different options again, and what's the best way to communicate those options to the people in the surveys?
Yeah, so the options, if I understand your question, the options kind of depend on what it is that your community's goals are. But typically the options are going to be either, and if you're kind of going to that little inset picture, if that's what you were getting at, the options typically are, they range from municipally owned to private owned, and then there's kind of some options of partnerships in between there, or of how the partnership should work. But really the main thing to communicate, Carlos, I think that was your question. The main thing to communicate, I think, is do we have the will and funding ability to do a municipal owned, if that's the option that is really the only option available, versus do we want to just have a partner come in where it's just theirs, and they come in and just do whatever they're going to do, and you know, and they will completely own it. We won't have any control over it. Those are the two ends of the spectrum. And then in between is some partial option, like, for example, one of my clients, the city of West Des Moines, you may have heard about them. We helped them look at a conduit because they didn't want to own the network and didn't think they had to, because they had plenty of partners around them. So they wanted to do a conduit system that would make it a lot cheaper for for providers to come in. And so an option for them that was kind of in between of, we'll own some of the infrastructure and partners will come in and lease that from us and use it themselves, and then put in their own fiber. So that was a mix of municipal owned and private owned. The cool thing about that project was it was so successful that Google Fiber came in and said, hey, how about if we help you put in the conduit and we'll bring Google Fiber in. That was the first new Google Fiber project in the nation, which was very cool. Now, I don't promise that for very many communities, just so you know, but that was because of a blended public and private, where public owned some, private owned some, and then Google Fiber just really liked the concept and they ran with it. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have a question. Most of us are in the stage where we're developing our broadband strategies for our communities. What things do we leave our broadband strategy project with so we can set ourselves up for a successful feasibility study? So we don't start all over again. So we sort of make progress, if you understand what I'm asking.
Linda, I think so. So do I hear you saying that you're you've been working on saying, okay, so we're need a broadband strategy. You're kind of in the process of broadband strategy, and now the question. So your question, I think, is, so what do we need to do now so that we're not reinventing the wheel?
Yes. So do I
what can we do
identify our goals as we leave our broadband strategy? That's a good place to leave it. And then somebody can pick it up for the next part where we would do a feasibility study. Yeah. So I'm trying to do a continuity, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yep. So Linda, here's what I would recommend. And I'm going pretty high level, right? Because I don't know a lot of details, but at a high level, what I would recommend is if you're working on a broadband strategy, it's typically at that stage of the game, it's typically pretty important that you know what your internal assets are. And so, for example, if you've got fiber or conduit, any next step is going to need to know what those are. And so in your strategy, saying, okay, here's what we're starting with is important. Goals are definitely important. And having the process of saying, okay, our goals are, we've got certain fiber connecting our buildings. We need to make sure that we have redundancy, or we want to extend what we have out, may or may not extend what we have out to be an incentive for providers to go out further than what we've done. I mean, those are all different kind of options of goals. And so that would be pretty important of what your goals are. If you can develop that in the strategy level, that would be outstanding. I think Linda, not knowing exactly what the goals of your strategy process are, I'm not sure what else. There may be some other suggestions I would have based on specific strategy pieces that you're working on. So not knowing those, I would say just at a high level, if you can make sure those two things, you can make sure you know that you are able to have and communicate what your assets are and how you want to use them, also what your goals are in the strategy, then you can start proving out options and feasibility, I think.
That helps. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Good. Well, thank you, Ken. That was really good. And HR Green, and it's we showed your slide with your contact information. I bet people have written that down. If not, the slides will be available on the Benton, Illinois Connected Community site. And then again, people can rewatch us and share this video. That address will be available in a day or so to get that again. So I really appreciate your willingness to share your expertise. And now I'm going to jump into a little intrepid for me to jump into wireless presentations, but I think people find it some options here to explore further. And we may have people on the line, including Ken, who can help me a little bit if necessary. So I'm going to share my screen again and find this presentation. There we go. And get here to the how'd that happen? We got that talking button up there that's in my way. So let's see, here we go. I need the button that's behind that button. Well, we're going to go ahead here. Hey, would somebody else say something? Then I'll get rid of that button on there.
Hi, Bill. How are you? Did that help move it?
It didn't. So that's a first for me. So I'm going to talk about community wireless strategies, and we'll see if we can get to it there.
Robbie, can you help?
Any case, we'll jump in. So spectrum's like real estate. You know, spectrum is the you know, every radio wave, every sound wave has a wave, and we know that there's a different real estate in that spectrum. The federal government divides that up for different uses, and it is a different parts have different characteristics. And so the location on that spectrum is really important. And so there's really three elements of performance here for wireless. One is that frequency, and low frequencies carry small amounts of data. Well, I'm going to talk about this in a minute. So there's also, so frequency is how much data that frequency can carry. The power is how far that can go, how much amplitude you can give to that. And then the question is that licensed frequency, which is your own, you own that, or unlicensed? And those are the things that are really drive the performance of wireless. And so know that with low frequency, the signal goes a very long distance. It's a very long, smooth waves out in the ocean. You can see that, but it's low bandwidth. So when we have our nuclear submarines out there in the middle of the ocean, a mile or two deep, and the Navy wants to get in touch with them, they use very low frequency signals that they carry yes or no kind of information. But then high frequency only goes a short distance. And when we talk about the Verizon 5G, that's the G is generation, not measured in gigahertz, but it only goes a short distance, a block or so. That signal can also be blocked by trees, or with 5G with windows into a building. But it's really high bandwidth. That's when they talk about the gigahertz level measurements of or gigabits of data. And it's always crazy. You think about the metric, the gigahertz, and that's different than a gigabit. So let's think about that in a couple different ways. So know that power, that increased power can send your signal farther. So everyone thinks, oh, turn it up, you know, more power. But then you also get distortion, which is a real issue. If you have to, if it's not a clean signal, people have to resend it, which really is lowers your bandwidth. And then know that increased power can interfere with people in the adjacent spectrum. And so they don't like that. And so you can get in trouble with that. Too little power simply means I can't hear you. And that's an issue as well. Know that licensed and unlicensed. The FCC is in control of how the spectrum is allocated to different users and owners. License means that the owner has exclusive use, like Verizon owns spectrum that they own that for cellular wireless. No one else can use that. The old kind of technologies, radio and television, those have their assigned frequencies, and people have to stay away from those. Certainly military and public safety have their licensed spectrum. Unlicensed spectrum is wide open. Anyone can use that. And so Wi-Fi, you know, you can have a Wi-Fi router in your own home. You can have those in your apartments. That's anyone can use it. And as a result, sometimes that gets crowded and people get interference. So if you're living in an apartment building and thin walls and everyone's got a Wi-Fi router, you can get a lot of interference in those places that can definitely affect the performance of your devices. And so that's a critical thing to think about. And then there's some lightly licensed spectrum that if you get there first, you kind of get the claim ownership. It's more like the Oklahoma land run, where if you first come, first serve, even though actually we know they weren't first people there, but they're the first ones to come take it. So under the Oklahoma Land Run. So that's a quick overview of this licensed versus unlicensed. And a vast majority of the spectrum is licensed and is not available for general public use. Some of those uses, there's not much use going on in them, but they are still reserved for historic purposes. And when we think about wireless, know that it's complicated. If I haven't confused you enough already on some of the things I've talked about, we'll talk more here about some of the strategies communities and users can make use of to promote better technology in their communities. And so we know about public Wi-Fi networks. We've seen, probably a decade or more ago, we've seen a lot of communities saying, oh, we're going to put Wi-Fi everywhere in communities and sell that as a service. Almost all these were turned out to be disasters. And one of the reasons is because wireless is so unpredictable. And so we hear in the systems that I'm aware of, the communities would put in their Wi-Fi access points and they'd have a plan. And then somebody would call up and want service and they couldn't get it. The signal was too weak and so on. And so the city would go out and they'd adjust the direction of that Wi-Fi router, the location a little bit. Before you know it, one of the other neighbors couldn't get the service either. And so it was real finicky to try and get that ubiquitous 100% coverage that Ken was talking about. And so the performance issues really suffered. So it's a lot of times now the cities that have kept these networks, they say, well, they're free, and which is great if you can get it. But if you can't get it, it's hard to really complain if you're not paying for something. And so that's what we've seen with these free wireless networks, tend to be more in parks or in districts and so on, bus stops and on buses, not really designed as a network that's going to be your day-to-day network you're going to try and telework on or go to school on and so on. But these networks have been most possible when there's a public fiber network. Like we know that Palatine has their own fiber. They could put up wireless networks in different places, and that would be, relatively easy to do. As a city, institutions share gigabit kind of bandwidth. The idea of splicing some off for public use in these access points isn't that difficult. You're not going to see that much bandwidth being used, and it can be, you've got the network, you've got the power poles and so on. So that's a relatively easy thing to do. But again, trying to do that with 100% residential coverage is difficult. Within affordable housing, we've seen both examples of wired and wireless connections to the building. Again, some of the buildings are connected with municipally owned, publicly owned fiber, and that's great to do. In other places, you put an antenna on your roof and you aim it at another wireless antenna, might be on City Hall or on the water tower, and you can have a wireless backbone that works pretty well, and so on. And then within the building, we've seen a combination of both wired and wireless strategies. So obviously the wireless, again, is cheaper. If you have, can put fiber up and down in the elevators and put some access points in the hallways, that can work pretty well. The wiring, if you have to wire every unit, that gets to be relatively expensive. Next week, we're gonna have a presentation for the adoption cohort meeting about the community in northern Minnesota, where they're just launching a wireless service in their building with a wired solution. And so that will be interesting to hear, but it's been quite a challenge to get that done to the quality that they wanted. More common, we see this just in community rooms and lobbies where a cable modem will be ordered from the local cable company or a DSL connection, and they just have a wireless router there to serve that central point where people can gather and get the service. And that's a pretty simple thing to do. we've seen these community operated networks, and that was what we were going to hear about today from our friends from Detroit. New York has a similar program. There's some other projects like this, but it's really a mission-driven kind of service for digital inclusion, workforce training, and community empowerment. And that's all great, but it gets to be complicated and difficult to really sustain. And that's why we really see so few of these that are active and so on. Heavy reliance on volunteers and grants to get going. A lot of times there's the idea, well, this is really for the community. It should be free or very low cost. Again, one of the issues with these wireless networks is that they are kind of touchy. And so there is kind of a high level of customer service that needs to be in place to support them. And so many times those expenses exceed the revenues. Volunteers get worn out, finding new volunteers and scaling it across the community. It's kind of a slow progress kind of model. It's exciting to think about, but it gets complicated, especially with this, when we add on these other missions of the, especially in the workforce training for people, or they try and do the community member training and so on. It gets to be a lot of things to try and maintain on low budgets generally. TV white spaces is something that Microsoft is really pushing. It's really a good possible technology out in rural areas in particular. And so they use a space that has been devoted to television signals. And so in a place like Chicago, there might be 8 or 9 channels that are used for just over-the-air broadcasting. If you get out in the rural communities, there might only be 1 or 2 of these channels that are broadcast that people can get over the air. And so that leaves a lot of available spectrum for use. And the real advantage is that these signals travel long distances. They're relatively low on the spectrum side. And so that's the long distance is a real advantage. The bandwidth available is kind of moderate on the, barely kind of meets that 25 down and 3 up kind of signal. But it is an interesting possible solution for places. And that is, right now you have to get permission from the FCC to use that bandwidth. And I'm not exactly sure how that process works. On a similar side here now, we have this CBRS spectrum, which is kind of a hot new thing when we think about wireless. And it's this is a big chunk of spectrum in that 3.5, that should actually be, no, I guess that is megahertz. So when we think about a lot of or fixed wireless, that's in the 2.4 spectrum. This is in the 3.5. And in the past, we've seen a lot of satellite use with this, and for the US Navy. Not a lot of Navy activity in Illinois or Minnesota, so not much use of that spectrum. And so they've just recently auctioned off some of that spectrum that wasn't being used, and then it's auctioned at the county level. And then there's a whole public general authorized access use. It's more of the first come, first serve. You have to apply to be able to use it to avoid a lot of interference and competition on that. But we're seeing that it goes a lot farther than Wi-Fi, but it is a relatively short distance kind of technology. And so we're seeing schools use this technology for digital inclusion, that the school could share its bandwidth out to other users using the CBRS capability. But we also see it for cellular data and fixed wireless services. As I said, signal goes 4 times farther than Wi-Fi. A lot of talk about this being compatible with both 4G and LTE and 5G, and has pretty good capacity. And so it's really seen now by the digital equity folks as a strategy for wireless. And so those are some of the wireless overview I wanted to provide you to think about how to, it's a possible solution for your community. Ken, you're an expert. How'd I do?
Bill, you did well. You did well. That was a good overview of the different aspects. Could I add just one comment on CBRS?
Yeah.
Okay. So CBRS is interesting, and it doesn't work for everybody because you may or may not be able to get the spectrum, and you know that there's some things that kind of have to be figured out as to whether you could use it or not. But one of the things that CBRS is, and it's basically they put in different components throughout the network, but it could cover an entire city. Depending on how the different components in the network go. One of the neat things about CBRS is they can divide it, unlike point to point, they can divide it into what they call slices. And so like one client we're working with right now who's looking at CBRS, they've got meters that they want to be able to communicate the data, and that could be over one slice of the CBRS. They've got traffic signal controllers, that can be another slice of CBRS. And CBRS can have multiple. So again, if you have the components right and all that, but it's possible to like aggregate some of the things that a community does to help pay for it, along with what Bill was talking about of how then it can be there to promote Wi-Fi or to convert to 5G as that conversion all happens. I mean, there's ways that you can use it along the way as it can provide some other things too. So that's an interesting technology. Again, it doesn't work for everybody, and it has to be proven whether and there are ways to prove whether it's available where you are, but it's an interesting thing and it's fairly new, except for the people who have been working on it for several years are some of the biggest names in the telecommunications world, like Nokia, Qualcomm, Microsoft. They're all have been working on it for several years, and so it's new in how the spectrum is being used, but there's a powerhouse behind making the components right. So I think it's worth exploring for some communities.
There is a kind of a database of where that spectrum is available. And so it's if you just Google CBRS spectrum, you can find those contacts. Google is one of them, and I think Motorola and a couple other organizations that kind of maintain a database of where that spectrum is available.
Hey, Bill.
And if you're
Yes.
interested,
Oh, go ahead, Ken.
well, just real quick, if you're interested in that, there are some folks who are nationally known vendors of CBRS components, and to have them, you know, what you want to do is to get them to come and check spectrum in your area, and then they can also come in and put in their equipment to see if it'll run the stuff you want to run over it, and so they can actually use it as a test bed, as a proving ground. That's the path you want to go. You don't want to try to figure this out on your own at this stage of the game. So I'm sorry, Adrienne.
No, I was going to say there was an interesting point raised in my suburban group about this issue that the football keeps getting passed around to various city and other agencies about who's paying for this. You know, is it supposed to be the library, the schools, the local government, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just was struck by your CBRS can be divided into slices. So this idea that each part of the slice that's being used, that cost can be then apportioned to a variety of different stakeholders in the process. And I just don't know, Bill, whether this is just true for CBRS or for any of the other wireless technologies that you discussed, because, you know, I think that's a very sound question to get over this hump of who's actually gonna, you know, front the cost for this. So Ken, maybe you could answer
And
that.
I think that's an important. Yeah, I think it's an all the above and grants. I think that if you're considering CBRS, aggregation is the way to, aggregation can be the way to pay for it. And then also, like for example, one of my clients has gotten a traffic signals grant that's actually going to pay for part of their slice. Now the beauty of it is their grant is actually bigger than the slice. And so when you take that and then say, okay, who else is going to use it, and now divide it among the other people that might use it, there are some. Now again, but I don't want to make this sound simpler than it is. They do have to get the equipment in to test to make sure that it will that all of those slices will work over it. That I mean, there's things that have to be proven here, and then then they provide a quote saying, yeah, here's the things you're going to do, and here's the quote. So there are steps that have to go to make it happen. But Adrian, I would say that one of the strengths of this is that there can be multiple sources of paying for it, and some of those actually can attract grants.
Well, right, because I'm assuming that traffic signal grant came from like a Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Federal Department of Transportation. Yeah.
So that's exactly what I was getting to. So if you think about all of the uses in the community and you look at the various federal and state grants available that come from more than just the Office of Broadband, but there's economic development and there's transportation in Illinois too, as well as all this federal stuff, I think you start to figure out how to organize the community, as you said, going back to your feasibility study, is when you look at those sources of funding, you really can say, well, a portion of it might be covered by this use and this group with these grants available, you know, et cetera. So my group had that kind of moment of, well, we're in this and there's a little bit of finger pointing going on, like whose responsibility is it to pay for this? So I'm sure all these groups are thinking through just that very issue right now.
Good.
And
Thanks,
let me just
Adrian.
say,
And the same
Adrian,
thing
let
is
me just
really
say
with
the next
fiber
step-
networks, right? Because there's a bundle of fibers in a fiber network, and you can slice and dice it that way as well.
Thank you, Bill. That's exactly right. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, and Adrian, I would just say, just so everybody knows, and you need to have your eyes wide open. I think this is, in a lot of ways, this is a discussion worth having, but just so everybody's eyes are wide open, then you have to get people to share their use. And that's not always the easiest task either. There can be folks that say, well, but mine won't, mine can't. Well, that's what you have to prove. Again, in a feasibility concept, you have to prove the security of it. I would just say the security of it, I have never seen it not proven because CBRS just does it differently than a lot of other technologies. So it typically can be proven. But just know that, like, if EMS says we could use part of it, EMS may say, but we're not going to share data, or we're not going to share our platform. Okay, just eyes wide open. Those are some things you have to work through.
So
it can be proven.
Yeah, but EMS meaning emergency management, I'm assuming, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So police and fire emergency, which is the responsibility of a city, right? So you start to see, again, where are those places? I love the traffic stuff, of course, duh, Ken, very good to bring that up for a client. But I think this is across, and Bill's absolutely right to bring this up. This is across both fiber projects and wireless. And if you have that combination,
absolutely.
Because again, I think there's so many communities here that have those apartment buildings or multi-tenant environments, multiple dwelling units, whatever you want to call it. That's often a combination of fiber to the building and then wireless, as Bill pointed out, from that point. So again, lots of different uses there. Thanks, guys. Very good.
Mm-hmm. Next up is Matt Schmidt. And Matt is the director of the Office of Broadband. Matt's going to share with us today some examples of successful projects that were funded by the Connect Illinois program in the first round, and advice for helping to be in on public-private partnerships in the second round. Matt, welcome.
Hey, thanks a lot, Bill, and thanks everybody. Really excited to join you guys today and see the progress you're making with this program. So Bill, right out of the gates here, I have some slides to share. You gave me the controls. That's good. I'm going to share them. All right. Thank you for that. And then let's see here. we're going to share slides.
Yeah, and we're seeing them now, but
Great.
yeah, there you go.
All right. I just worked through that. So
better than me.
Again, we all stumble. You'd think after all these months of relying solely on Zoom or WebEx, we'd have this down, but yes. So great conversation today. Happy to join you. As Bill had mentioned, I'd like to talk a little bit about our round one projects, a couple of them that demonstrated degrees of community involvement, and then also take this opportunity to talk a little bit about round two and how we're focusing on that community role, because we really do take it very seriously. And so, as I always do, I like to focus on our Connect Illinois website and show folks the opportunities that we have there and the resources available to you. I'll do this real quick because we've already spent some time on this in the past. This is our main landing page, got a vertical menu on the right. You can scroll down and it'll come to broadband grants. And of course, if you're interested in getting information on our digital equity grants, we already covered that, but that's available on the same menu as well. But looking at our broadband grant menu header here, we've got some resources regarding round one, including the round one summaries of projects funded, as well as some information regarding our round two notice of funding opportunity, the NOFO. And then below that, we've got some supplementary materials regarding round two. We call it our application packets. There's two parts, 1 and 2. And so the next couple slides will be referencing materials that you can access directly on our website right there. Happy to send these slides your way too, but this information is all available right on that website. And so getting into our round two NOFO, just so folks understand, our notice of funding opportunity for round two, another $50 million available. We have 4 different categories for broadband infrastructure or access, if you will. One we call broadband access, that's really focused solely on extending new or improved connectivity to homes, businesses, community anchor institutions in or underserved areas of the state. We have a new category called broadband equity that wants to focus on doing that kind of work in areas that have demonstrable need for strong public sector investment, whether it's historically low adoption rates, could be poverty or unemployment. We want to shine a bright light on making sure that we're targeting resources accordingly. And so we could go to that map that you guys were talking about earlier that is deeply flawed on where broadband is and is not. But nonetheless, it's the best thing we've got going for the next couple of months. And we recognize there are areas in Illinois that definitely need investment. But even within that map, there are areas that are particularly lacking in private sector investment. And that's what that broadband equity category is for in particular. And then we got a couple additional categories: broadband innovation, how you leverage that extended connectivity to do new and interesting things in e-learning or telehealth or working from home, or precision ag for those rural areas that are interested in that. And then finally, urban broadband, we have a category specific to metropolitan areas of 75,000 residents or more. And the reason that we have these 4 categories is we want to keep applications relatively comparable on an apples to apples basis, so to speak. And so we can kind of compare, again, apples to apples. Moving on here, this is a preview of round 2 here in our selection criteria. Again, this is available in the application packet that's posted to that website. You run through the criteria that we use to consider and score our applications that come to us. Obviously, project impact is important. What is this infrastructure build accomplishing for the area that it intends to serve? We're interested in the non-state match and the demonstration of need. This is a matching grant program, after all, and to the extent that we're able to leverage non-state resources to maximize the impact of our state investment, we want to take advantage of that. At the flip, on the same time, we want to make sure that we recognize that not all areas are on equal footing in Illinois, and where there's an equitable argument for increased public investment, we want to identify those areas and invest accordingly. The third category here, community support. That's why we have our, or one of the reasons we have our Illinois Connected Communities program. That's, a focus of our conversation today. It's a stated goal for our Connect Illinois program to make sure that the applications we receive, the grants that we issue, to the extent possible, are really rooted in a community's vision for its broadband future. And so that's something that we'll get into in the future slides here. We put some scoring behind that. It's not just lip service, but we really want to emphasize that where we can. And then we get into other categories about, the quality of the project, readiness, viability, sustainability. In this next round, we're increasing our focus on affordability and adoption assistance. As you're learning through this process, or you already knew, the infrastructure is only part of the conversation, making sure that it is truly affordable and accessible to all communities and members in the community is a really important consideration. And then finally, another category, open access, shared use, and business strategy. And that's trying to get at the idea that we want to maximize essentially the usefulness of this public investment that we're making. And so that where possible, we are, collaborating with, maybe it's public safety or our Illinois Sensory Network for our educational institutions, other, public or private networks that are out there that we can leverage for our shared benefit. So that's the selection criteria. The next slide, next two slides actually get into our application itself for round 2 funding. And I didn't share all of the application with you here, but this is actually a slide, straight from the application itself, dealing with community support, the kinds of things that we're looking for. And so all of our applications, whether they're coming from a community or a provider, a cooperative, a nonprofit, we really want to stress that work has been done on the front end to garner community support. And ideally, an application that comes to us is actually emanating from a community's vision for improving its broadband, and not something that is kind of dreamt up, from a provider, but rather that is in response and in partnership with that community, if not coming to us directly from the community itself. And so there's different ways of expressing that community support. A lot of times with grant programs, you'll see letters of support, and we take those seriously, but we also stress that we don't want form letters. We want to make sure that the letters that we receive are personalized, that really speak to an individual or an organization's connection to the proposed deployment. And so we emphasize that in our application packet and our application materials. And you can see at the bottom here, a community strategic plan. Well, that's one thing that we're expecting our connected communities to produce at the end of this engagement. And we think it puts you in a position to take next steps on improving, whether it's access or adoption or utilization. We want to make sure that that the community that's done that and that plan is incorporated into an application we receive, that points are awarded accordingly. And so we give our applicants an opportunity to speak to that. And then finally, some communities, I think, as we mentioned, have gone about a community survey or have really gotten into the conversation and understanding where their needs truly are. And to the extent that's been done, that adds value. That adds, I think, a level of quality to an application. You've done your homework, so to speak. And so to the extent that we're able to capture that, pull it into an application, we want to see that. And then finally, this is kind of the other end of that the spectrum on what communities can do, an actual financial commitment from the community or from various community stakeholders. Ideally, we see communities put some skin in the game, and so that this is truly a public-private partnership or a state-local partnership. Ideally, we'd love to see state, local, federal partnerships, but the whole idea is we need all hands on deck to really to meet our goals and to get the most out of this truly historic investment we're making in Connect Illinois infrastructure. And so I wanted to take this opportunity just to point you directly to how we're talking about this in our materials. And so quick overview there. Looking back at Connect Illinois Round 1, I'm not sure if I've shared this with you guys before or not, but here's a quick map, and I apologize if it's too small to really make much sense of. But we were able to get a project in every one of the 10 economic development regions of Illinois. There was a rural tilt in Round 1, But we expect that moving into round 2 and beyond, that we see more of our urban communities and providers seeing opportunity in Connect Illinois and wanting to take part of this program. And so everything from, Cook County in the Northeast all the way down to, a collection of projects along the southwestern border, and really everywhere in between. Some high quality projects here. Overall, $50 million, leveraged $65 million of non-state match for $115 million of total broadband investment. I'm not going to read through each one of these bullets, but we expect to see over 26,000 new or improved connections based upon this public-private partnership. The last slide I'll point to, though, is 28 projects, 18 different grantees. And so an applicant could apply for more than one grant, and we saw that. And so out of those 28 projects, 17 of the 28 projects were driven by providers, and one was driven by a local government. And that's what I'm saying is the application came to us from a local government. In this case, it was Cook County. The other 17 grantees that we're dealing with are all providers. And that's fine as long as those providers really speak to that community's vision for its broadband future. To the extent they don't, we feel like that's a missed opportunity. And so this is one area that I think we would like to make improvements for every round of funding that we have with Connect Illinois. And so moving on to that next slide here, if you go back to that Connect Illinois website, you scroll down that vertical menu at the right, and you'll see round 1 summaries. This is what that summary document looks like. And so for each one of our 28 projects, you can scroll down and get kind of a high level, fairly technical description of what that project is accomplishing. But nonetheless, it's a resource that we wanted to point you to just in case you're curious. And so getting into those descriptions, if you scroll down further, you'll come across the Cook County application. And this is for a middle mile fiber extension with the Chicago Southland Fiber Network. So that network is already currently in place in part, and the county came to us and asked for a state Connect Illinois grant to extend that middle mile fiber infrastructure to connect various public facilities and also community anchor institutions throughout the county. And we call it middle mile. It's not going out to homes or businesses. I think the county and in partners with the Chicago Southland Fiber Network may have some ultimate next step goals of leveraging their fiber towards last mile connectivity. But for the time being, this is operating primarily as a middle mile project. And so $1.9 million grant, give or take, for a $2.5 million county contribution, total project $4.4 million. And again, this is in the Chicago Southlands of Cook County. And we think that this is a project that has great promise in terms of what they're able to do, not only in the short term for their community anchor institutions and their public facilities, which there are a lot in any county, but particularly in Cook County, and also moving out into the future on how you leverage that fiber asset for providing last mile consumer connectivity, so to speak, at homes or businesses. And moving, I'll just summarize real quickly. One thing that was very powerful with the Cook County application is that it was driven by the county, and there was a strong public value and public interest that was reflected in their application, as well as a strong community financial commitment, over 50% of the total project cost. And so you can see in the third bullet here, it speaks to the communities that will be served not with last mile connectivity to the home right now, but the middle mile infrastructure that might make that future last mile expansion all the more easier. And so I suspect that the fact that we funded the Cook County project in round 1 is going to inspire similar projects from other communities around the state for round 2. My sense is that a number of applicants kind of sat out round 1, just wanted to see what kind of projects we funded, how things went. And so certainly I think from our metropolitan areas around the state and other regional centers, or even in smaller cities or communities, I can see more of this kind of project coming to us in round 2. And this isn't the only kind of project that we would fund coming from a local government or a county, but this is one that we did fund, and one that I would suspect will set an example for others to follow in part or in full. Now, another project that we have from Madison Communications, again, $4.2 million grant, total project of $9.4 million. So there was a strong non-state match of over $5 million there, if I'm doing my math right. And this builds out to primarily rural areas in Macoupin and Madison counties. This project, even though it does not bring to the table public dollars, it does make strong connections with community anchor institutions, particularly with the local healthcare provider in the area. And so even before the pandemic, and I think we've seen a dramatic expansion of telehealth opportunities and practices around the state, the Madison Communications, in partnership with their local healthcare provider, wanted to invest in that future mode of healthcare delivery that is telehealth, and wanted to make sure that they were connecting not only their anchor institutions and their hospitals and medical facilities in those areas, but also the families at home that might like to benefit from telehealth applications. And so that was clear in their application, making those connections not only to the telehealth application, but also incorporating that voice of that community anchor. And it really resonated, and something that we thought added a lot of value to their application. It made it very compelling. Of course, they had a very strong non-state match coming from the provider in this case, but nonetheless, we thought that there's different ways of incorporating that community vision, and this was one way that they did so effectively. And then the last project that I would overview, and I'm certainly happy to come back to these, Grafton Technologies in Jersey County has a vision for connecting really, really rural areas of the county with up to gigabit service. And so they asked for and received a $1.5 million grant for a total project of $3.9 million. And their goal is to connect homes, businesses, farms, community anchor institutions, but in many cases, farms with last mile connectivity, in this case, fiber. And one of the impetuses for this was not only precision agriculture, but also remote learning. And again, they were putting this application together before the pandemic hit. But after they received the grant, they actually were the first of our grantees to execute a grant agreement and get to work and break ground. And much of it was to be responsive to community need for remote learning, in making sure that students at home during the pandemic had access to high-speed internet. And so I think this is a project that is really important to highlight, because not only did they anticipate the importance of needing to partner with the school district in this case to understand the needs of their families and students at home, but when the need became dire, they were able to speed up their expansion plans and get in the ground earlier than anticipated to make sure that communities and families and students at home had access to engage in remote learning. And so again, that's the kind of thing that we're looking for in these applications is, yes, ideally we'd have strong public and private contributions at the local level to pair with our Connect Illinois grant, again, to maximize the overall impact of that investment, but also making sure that those applications reflect the vision that the community is establishing for its technology future. And so that's why, again, that's one of the reasons we've got the Illinois Connected Communities program in the first place. That's why we're pushing you to think hard about what you want to incorporate in your broadband plan, so to speak, in how to take that planning and that initial effort that we're all spending time on right now, translating that into action. And of course, we look forward to getting more community-driven applications in round 2 of Connect Illinois. And so with that said, I will stop myself, Bill. I hope I didn't go over too badly here. If there are any questions, happy to stand for them. Otherwise, great to join you guys today.
Good, thank you, Matt.
Hey, Bill, can I ask a question? It's Adrienne.
Yeah, right after Linda.
Oh, okay, Linda, go.
Okay. Hey, Matt, Linda Young from South Shore, the NNA. It will be great. So that information to me is very good. It would be great though if we could put contact names and have Cook County, DuPage County, whoever county, listed and show those Connect Illinois Round 1 winners, the Illinois Connected Community winners. So now we've got names and folks in our region that could maybe help, us along in the process.
That makes a lot of sense. I'd be happy to put you in touch with the folks that we've worked with at the county. And
Thank you.
that's what this is all about, making connections and getting things done.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, great question.
Go ahead, Adrienne.
So actually mine's a follow-up to that, which is in your list of the communities that are going to benefit from the Cook County project. I saw 2 of our Illinois connected communities. There was Harvey plus Chicago Heights Park Forest. And so I understand that this is a middle mile network, but it would be really great for Harvey and Park Forest Chicago Heights to be aware of where those assets are running, so that they might be able to talk with a last mile provider or look at wireless off that fiber to connect unserved populations in both of those communities.
And I'd be happy to make those connections that I just mentioned. And the county, for its part, we're just executing the grant agreement now. And so now is the perfect time, I think, to talk about how best to use this investment and again, get the most out of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether any of those communities are on today's call, but I'm just sticking this on Bill's radar for obviously a follow-up discussion. Very interesting.
And I should just emphasize, if your community is not on any of these lists, especially this one, because it's building off an existing network, you may actually be on the network. It's just that in this case, the county hasn't taken kind of next steps to thinking about how to leverage that middle mile infrastructure or the institutional fiber network for last mile connectivity. And so I would say that just because your community's name may not be listed here doesn't mean you couldn't benefit from the next step of, I think, where this investment may lead.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Any other questions for the Director of the Office of Broadband? So I think, Matt, one of the things that some of our Cook County communities are challenged with is, right now they've got a couple large providers in their communities that maybe aren't delivering the services to those residential areas that the communities deserve. Any advice for them to think about either working with incumbents or trying to attract different providers?
Well,
clearly those are shown as served on the state maps.
Right. Yeah. I heard that comment earlier, and I couldn't agree more that, I think that there's different ways of getting at the question of access. And I think the mapping that we currently rely upon from the FCC, deeply flawed. We're looking at actually developing different mapping layers that take adoption and affordability into account, so that we get a fuller sense as to, all right, where are there real problem areas in the state of Illinois that need some attention? And so that's, we're on it. It just, it takes a little bit of time to develop that. But what I would say is this: I think that for those who are paying attention to what we're trying to do with round 2 of Connect Illinois, an increased emphasis on equity and different aspects thereof, I think the broadband undertaking by definition is an equity undertaking. But we're really serious about this. And so I think providers large and small who are paying attention should know that as well. And so I think if a community is interested in reaching out to a provider and say, hey, we look at the maps, we look at the American Community Survey data on adoption, we know that we've got some issues here, and we want to leverage some of the state funding to do something about it. I think that that's a good first step, and try to get the attention of the providers in your area or nearby that you might like to partner with, just to see what their plans are and make sure that they know of your interest in doing something, hopefully together, or certainly something that complements or adds value to the options in your area. And so that's easier said than done. But if there's somebody who would like to try to connect with the provider, I'd be happy to, again, try to make those connections, because that's part of the job here.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. I'll connect with you offline on that.
No, that sounds good.
Well, good.
Well, Bill,
you,
thanks
Matt.
a lot for letting me join you guys. I really appreciate all the hard work you're putting into round 1 of Illinois Connected Communities. So thanks.
Hey, Matt, one more thing. So on the Navigator program.
Sure.
it seems that's right in the, the ballpark where a lot of our communities are thinking on the adoption side. Do you think just the other day I was on a meeting with a relatively smaller community, maybe even a neighborhood or both, that, oh, we should apply for that. And what's the scale of application you think you might look favorably on? Is a town is pretty small, or a school district, or should these be collaborative?
This is meant to be, yes, it absolutely can be. And so I think the key here for the Digital Navigator program, and we're hoping to have a follow-up webinar that deals specifically with digital navigators and kind of getting into the weeds on this in the near term here. But the point is, I think if you've got an organization or a community that is willing to say, like, look, here is the area that we'd like to serve essentially with this digital navigator or navigators, and you came to us in your application and said, all right, we're able to make available, this person's time or these, people's time on an ongoing basis. And you describe how benefiting from going through the training and getting the digital navigator skills and the digital equity ecosystem work that goes into that. I think as long as you're able to make the case that you're able to match that time that essentially you'd be devoting to the area that you would be serving, as long as that's commensurate, I think that hey, we could hear from a county. I don't think it makes sense to get much bigger than that, but I could be wrong. I mean, maybe there's a region out there that says, look, we're going to devote a big chunk of time to this from one of our employees, and we want to go through the training and benefit from all of this. I would certainly be open to hearing from that kind of applicant. And so it really is meant to be inclusive from an applicant standpoint.
Good.
My sense is smaller is probably better, but it really, again, hey, just look at the community you want to serve and make sure that you're kind of trying to line up available hours to serve the expected need.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, watch out for that webinar. Otherwise, thanks a lot for your time today. Great to join you.
Good. Any other comments, questions, requests for assistance in a particular area? What can our Illinois Connected Community team do to help you be more successful?
Bill, this is Ann. I have a question. So would a community do like fiber plus the wireless? Would that be like part of our plan, or are those two exclusive, or would you combine them together?
So that's a great question, Ann. And so I think there's, as Ken talked about with the goals, what's the goal for your community? I think that's really important. So that will help drive the technology solution. So the idea that, if ubiquity is really important, you might do fiber optics in the more dense areas where that can pay for itself. And you might decide to do some kind of wireless network for the unserved parts, or the more difficult, more expensive parts to do. You could also think, okay, well, we're going to do fiber everywhere and then do wireless in a downtown area or in a university area or in a athletic fields complex area. So you could pick and choose where you wanted to do that wireless service. You have to say, well, what's that purpose of the wireless? Is it to serve visitors? Is it to support tourists or kids in a particular neighborhood or something? And so that will help, your goals will really help drive, the deployment. So if you would say, okay, well, we're going to do fiber to the home in a neighborhood, to invest a bunch of money in outside wireless services might not be a real cost-effective solution. There might not be enough benefit to having a bunch of Wi-Fi access points in a neighborhood if people are inside using internet most of the time. And so that's where you kind of let your goals drive your design. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So in Palatine, downtown would be a good place, to have that kind of wireless network that people are walking up and down the streets and there's activities and festivals and kind of things where that network would have a lot of value.
But we really want the fiber to go out to the apartment complexes.
Ideally, everyone has fiber. I think that's
Okay.
always, from my perspective, that's always the right decision. We're talking about gigabit capabilities, multiple gigabit capabilities, a future-proof kind of investment. So no one has to settle if everyone has fiber. And so from my perspective, that's the right choice.
But Bill, not necessarily to every unit within the building, just out to the building itself? Or are you saying to every unit?
Well, I think again, that's, ideally everyone would have fiber to the home in the apartment building. But you could settle, if you have fiber to the building and everyone can have, the wiring within the building that you can tie into the copper lines, that's essentially what they do a lot in South Korea, where they have very high-speed internet. They're using copper lines over that last, couple hundred feet, which could bring some very high speed to that. Or you might find out that the wiring is from the 1950s and that apartment building is not so great. And so then fiber to the building and then either rewired, which could be a very expensive activity, or using wireless, which would be more affordable but more quirky, that can work that way.
But would it be cost prohibitive for fiber to like every unit?
That can be expensive.
Yeah, so.
Because if you have to be drilling
probably
through
not
walls.
realistic, right?
So if you would go online and look like to Corning and say apartment building, fiber to the apartments or something, Corning is a big manufacturer of fiber optics. You'll actually see they have products that can, essentially they hang in the hallway and then they have a molding that goes over it. And then it covers up where you're drilling into the building, into the apartments. But that's essentially rewiring the building. It's it's expensive. And depending on, can the clientele, are they interested? If it's a condo building, they might agree to pay for that. If it's an affordable housing project where, the public owns it or it's a private landlord and the rents aren't great, and probably broadband isn't driving choice of, as an amenity, then maybe that isn't a great investment for the owner. And certainly wireless can go in a lot faster. It could be an interim solution too, where you say, okay, well, let's do fiber to the building and then wireless as best we can. And then over a period of, X number of years, 2 years, rewire, to the unit. That could be a possibility.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for that question. Thanks everyone for joining today. Next week, next Thursday, we're going to talk about broadband adoption strategies, and we've got a good agenda that will be sent out here in the next day or so. And then the 17th, around broadband use. So that will be we're working on that agenda and think that we promise that will be good as well. So thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.